Hey guys, how you doing today? Oh, beautiful, 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 beautiful day. I am exhausted. Can you see that I'm sunburned? Is that something you guys can see? I got sunburnt, man, from doing those last few videos, like where I've been out and about and doing stuff. It's shockingly nice, but it's still one of these things where you gotta it's like the Canadian trick, right? Like things are still a little cold, things are still a little chilly, but you forget that the sun is a burning fiasco nonsense. And like my hair is just getting ridiculous. Look how ridiculous this hair is. This whole thing. I'm gonna shave this. I'm gonna shave all this down. So the whole purpose of this video, guys, I like to report on what I consider to be the big news. Well, the big news for me, 400 subscribers, guys. The channel is growing and it's growing really well. If you haven't noticed, I've been doing more like straight, like journalistic, journal like style reporting, and I think that's where this channel is evolving to, you know, like these sorts of like I sit down or I have a walk and talk kind of things, or like make commentary of the day sort of videos. Like those are still going to happen. I don't think that there's enough big stories for me to warrant constantly doing like a whole report on it, but I think they're going to come, and I think they're going to come fast and furious, right? Like I feel like there is always that anti-lockdown protest that's going to happen every Saturday, right? That video really well received. If you're one of those people that watched that video and then subscribe because of it, oh, God bless you. God bless you guys for doing so. Please make sure you like, share, subscribe this video. If you want to support me directly, my Patreon is down below. A few people have jumped on and donated directly through the Patreon because of those last few videos that I've done. God bless you guys. God bless you guys. Because, like, and it gets me really wondering and thinking, like, why is it that this channel is starting to grow now? Like, what is it that is happening? And I really do think it is that people know they've been abandoned. Like, we know we've been abandoned. The abandonment is palpable. We understand it. We know that there are billionaires who have dominated the market that we're forced to sell ourselves to in a system called wage slavery. Like, we know. It's really clear and it's really obvious, but no one is willing to talk about it. No one is willing to actually broach the subject that food and shelter are withheld from us unless we sell ourselves to a billionaire-dominated market. And it was the Richard Wolff Destiny debate that really got me thinking about, like, oh yeah, like there are people who are in this world, like somebody like Destiny. He literally has never worked a day in his life. He's never worked a job in his life, right? Like he plays video games. And has built a following because of that, and then has made this pivot into politics where he genuinely doesn't know anything about the subject because he's never actually worked a day in his life, and he's never actually. And there are lots of people out there who are like that. There are lots of people who just like went through school, went into university, got a job right out of university, and they just work that job until the day they die, and that's their whole thing, and they never actually pause to consider, like, what it means to like be in a capitalist structure. They don't actually pause and consider, like, what is actually happening. I am selling myself into a labor market where I am disposable, and they're very upfront about how disposable we are, right? They're very upfront about that. They don't bullshit us. And if you start to stand up and say, wait a minute, everybody needs food, everybody needs shelter, these things should be guaranteed, these things are human rights, like our society, which provides these things in abundance, should provide them to us, and that should be built into the system. And if you say those things out loud, suddenly you're a communist, right? Suddenly you're a communist. Well, here I am embracing that title because I genuinely believe that people should have food and people should have shelter, and a society that withholds those things in exchange for your labor is a slave society, which ours is, right? And there are apologists like this Destiny guy, but also like most of the mainstream news media, right? There are these apologists who they haven't even begun to consider that question. The simple question of, like, oh yeah, like, why is our society withholding food and shelter? Why don't we just get food and shelter as a byproduct of being alive in this system. Everybody needs it. Everybody needs it. And the conservative responses to this kind of statement really reveal their sort of sociopathic mania, right? It's like, well, why don't you get a piece of land and work your own, like, grow your own food then? It's like, because I can't own land. Like, the land is so overpriced and is at such a premium that I can't possibly own as much land as would be required to feed even a single person, right? I've been excluded from this process. The process has become so automated and so technologically driven and requires such a small amount of labor to achieve in the first place, to make so much food that we're willing to sell it off to other nations and also like just discard huge amounts. Like, we're throwing away like 30% of the food we produce. We're just throwing it away, right? And for stupid reasons. Like, you ever notice you go to the supermarket and every apple looks like a pristine, like, round, perfect apple? You think apples come off the trees looking like that? You think every apple that they pick is like a pristine, good-looking apple? No. There's a ton of apples that have irregularities that are just misshapen. They just look weird. You know what they do with those? They bin them. Still a perfectly good apple. Still is going to taste like an apple. Still perfectly reasonable. They bin them. So we have and at this point it's not a practical issue, right? We're not having a practicality issue anymore. We make all the food we can eat and then some. We have all the housing we need and then some. The issue is strictly an ideological one. It's strictly this ideological line that says, oh no, you don't get food and you don't get shelter because you didn't earn it, or you don't deserve it. And like, when you actually pause and think about what these people are saying, like, you are a randomly generated PC player character, right, in the game of Earth, right? Here you are. You're completely generated by a quantum system, right? By quantum energy that just randomly generates you into the world. You didn't ask to be here, right? You haven't given your consent to be here. You're just here. And one of the major rules, obviously, one of the major rules that's baked into the system that you are a part of is that you require food and you require shelter. And if you don't get those things, then the quantum energy goes, oh, well, you can't get food and you can't get shelter, so you can't survive, right? You return back to the energy. You die, right? And if there are people in the world who are doing whatever they can to withhold food and shelter from you, that they are standing between this divine demand for food and shelter, then they're placing themselves above, and they're placing their ideology as more important than the demand given by the energy that created you in the first place, right? This is what's happening, right? It's very cleanly what's happening. And any ideology whatsoever that is put between you and your need for food and shelter is the ideology of a death cult. It's the ideology of the Red Skull. It's this Jordan Peterson-esque, like, cheering for you to individually succeed and stand up straight, but we're not going to give you food and shelter. So they end up cheerleading for your success while putting the boot on your back, right? In this kind of psychopathic system that they defend. And like, a channel like this, I think, becomes extremely important in a society that refuses to actually talk about what I am talking about, right? Like, just the other, I watch Steve Paikin, right? And I actually like Steve Paikin. I think he's got a good show and he has good people on and all this. But anytime he has a panel discussion on any subject, so like, take the deficit, for example, right? He'll have a panel discussion about the deficit, and the discussion, it's that classic liberal game is tightly constrained in a very small kind of like segment, right? You're allowed to be like, the deficit is bad and we have to pay it down, and you're allowed to say like, yeah, the deficit's bad, but we need to continue spending in order to stimulate. But if you actually go above that and you start to say, wait a minute, the deficit is not a debt, right? The government is not a business. The government is not a household, right? The deficit isn't a measure of debt. The deficit is just a measure of how much the government has spent in the society. So if you have a $1 trillion economy and the deficit is $100 billion, right? Then 10% of your economy exists as government spending, right? That's what a deficit is measuring. It's not a debt. It's not a debt that you'd have to pay off. But Steve Paikin is never going to have anybody on his show to actually talk this way, right? Steve Paikin is he's going to have some conservative on his show to be like, the deficit needs to be paid down because it's the same as household debt. But he's never going to have somebody stand up and say, the deficit is not household debt. Like, the deficit is not a business. It's not like, the government is the government. It can print money. It can print the resources that it needs. It can destroy money as well through taxation, right? And so we need a channel like this. We need shows like this where people are doing genuine research from the communist and socialist perspective to actually stand up and say to these people, like, what you're talking about is kind of bullshitty, dude. Like, it's kind of bullshitty. And it's becoming more and more obvious to everybody. That's the big thing. It's becoming more and more obvious that the conversation has become not only tighter and tighter and tighter, but it's also shifted further and further to the right, right? Like, that today's conservatives are so far to the right that they can't help but be fascists, and our liberals are essentially conservatives, and our NDP are basically liberals, right? And who's actually on the left? Who's the actual leftists in this conversation? Who are the actual socialists? Well, they don't exist in our political system. They're not part of the political system. They've been purposefully chased out of the political system. And this creates just this massive imbalance where you have this sort of incestuous conversation where all solutions need to come from this capitalist caste and this capitalist structure, which fails. It can't provide anything, right? Capitalism doesn't provide anything. Capitalism creates genocide and war. That's what it does. That's how it perpetuates itself, is that it steals resources and then distributes the resources to people it can enslave into its wage slave society. Like, that's how capitalism works. So under these circumstances, guys, under these circumstances, you are doing really wonderfully. You really are. Like, we are gaslit every single day by billionaires who spend billions of dollars to gaslight us. They have erected entire institutions, entire companies, entire industries to gaslight us, tell us, to diminish the reality that we are divine beings living on divine energy. We are equal in amongst each other as humans, and we are equal to all other forms of life that exist on this plane of reality, insofar as the energy that creates us is concerned. And we spend billions and billions and billions of dollars to deceive ourselves into believing anything other than that. And it's completely so that we will just acquiesce to this wage slave system that exists to dominate and destroy us. Like, I haven't even talked about climate change. I haven't even talked about that, how that's going to come through and wipe us out. And that the billionaire class is setting itself up to just rule us like the Hunger Games, right? Like, they're not interested in stopping climate change. They're just interested in positioning themselves so that when climate change starts to wipe us out, they'll be positioned to rule. Under these circumstances, you're doing wonderfully. You're making good decisions for yourselves. You're doing exactly what you need to do for yourself and for the people around you. Good luck. We're going to need it.